Morning, everyone, and happy Friday. And welcome to the Conservation Stewardship Program, or the CSP webinar. And this is Penny Poley, and I am the Conservation Training and Membership Services Manager at Wisconsin Land+Water. Today, our presenter is Andy Hart. And Andy is a state forester for NRCS and is also the lead person who put this webinar series together. So thanks much, Andy, for doing that. We have a couple more left in this series. So I think that's about it. I'm going to turn it over to Andy. Are you ready to go?
Yep, I'm ready to go. So today on this sitcom training, we're going to talk about the Conservation Stewardship Program and really focusing on the CSP enhancements on forests. It's going to be kind of a brief overview. It's more of an awareness type training of some of the enhancements that are available on the forest through the CSP program. CSP actually has quite a bit to offer depending on what your client's needs are and what the forest situation is like. But this program is a great alternative to equip. A lot of it, like I said, depending on what direction the landowner wants to go. So we're going to cover in this, we're just going to basically talk about the enhancements available on forests and resource concerns that are addressed by the enhancement. Talk a little bit about a short technical description of the enhancements. We're not going to cover the eligibility program information. I'm not going to go over what each of these things pays. I do have a link at the end that'll take you to the payment part, and we're going to not cover all the forest enhancements. I took the vast majority of them, and there's probably like 36 really directly related to forestry, but there's probably like with wildlife and some of the grazing and some of the other things with forest, you're getting in the range of 50 some, and we don't really have the time to cover all those. So with that, I'm going to just kind of jump right into going through a lot of the scenarios that are available. Last I checked, they were not available on the EFOTOG public site, which is the job sheet for these, but they should be posted pretty soon. Like I said, I had the link to the payments for it, and I will let people know once that those things are available. There's basically a job sheet from national headquarters, and if there is any kind of Wisconsin-specific supplement, those would be located there. But we're not going to get real in-depth like that. We're just mostly, like I said, it's an awareness of what enhancements are out there. So with that, one of the things we should first talk about is CSP and Forest Management Plan. We're in a process of adopting a program called CART, and this may change some things up, so this is not written in stone here. But as of now, CSP in forestry is designed to go above and beyond normal management. Plans are typically not required for some, but not all the enhancements. So some of the enhancements are actually directly related to updating a plan, writing a plan, and applying that on the ground. But my advice to you, folks out there, is if you're going to talk with a customer about CSP, I think it's a really wise move to, if they don't already have a forest management plan, to get a forest management plan through EQIP or whatever way the landowner can do that, because they will definitely get a better product if there's a plan written already, and it'll allow the selections to be more specific to the site. And CART may change that. It may require a plan. I haven't gotten that far, but as of now, we'll just kind of stick with this. But like I said, my advice is to definitely try to get people to get a plan first. They will have a much better product in the end. With that, we'll just kind of start talking about some of the enhancements. So there's start with brush management to improve wildlife habitat. Is used to create a desired plant community for the identified wildlife species, does not apply to removal by fire or removal of vegetation to facilitate a land use change. So people that have worked with NRCS programs or basically in land management know a lot about brush management in the state. Particular comes to mind is buckthorn, but that is one enhancement that is available, with the resource concern being plant structure and composition, plant pressure and health, terrestrial habitat for wildlife and vertebrates, which would be the resource concern that ties best probably with the name, to improve wildlife habitat. Another enhancement that is available is much like brush management, but it's herbaceous weed treatment to create desired plant communities consistent with the ecological site. Again, it's mechanical. chemical or biological herbaceous weed treatment will be used to control targeted herbaceous weeds to create, release, or restore desired plant communities that are consistent with achievable ecological site steady state descriptions. The resource concern for that is plant productivity and health, plant structure and composition, and plant pest pressure. This one is not typically in a forest, but I thought I'd put this one out there because a lot of the forests, a lot of landowners have these types of things on their property. Next to the forest, some open areas. This one is conservation cover for pollinators and beneficial insects. I think it's pretty timely. There's a National Geographic article that was put out today about the dramatic loss of honeybees in North America and Canada. And so I think anytime we can improve the situation for honeybees, we're all better off. But I like to put that one in there because there's a lot of times where in MFL it's unproductive land, or in NRCS it's just land that's not forested, and they have opportunities to do stuff like this outside of the forested area. Now, I'm not going to, there's a number of different enhancements that are referred to fire and burning and stuff like that. I'm going to only talk about one. I do believe there's 5 or 6 different enhancements regarding fire. But the one I'm talking about today is going to be sequential patch burning, and that's basically taking and burning small parts of your forest. 1 year burn a third of it, 1 year burn another third, another year burn another third. The idea is to create a mosaic on the landscape of different stages of vegetation coming back. And this also helps reduce fire risk in the long term by keeping the fuels loading down. But these are for a lot of this will be, it's designed mostly for the south, but it'll work well in our oak conifer forests here as well. Another enhancement is, and this is kind of new to getting into NRCS world, is some of the stuff with agroforestry. We've had a number of sitcom trainings on this, and we've been sending out in the Ecosciences Weekly Bulletin information that people can learn about it before we actually get the program out there, like right now. These are not available in EQIP this year, and we're hoping to next year. But for CSP, this is going to be one of the avenues that somebody could take to utilize silvopasture. I think silvopasture, everybody thinks about cows, so I thought I'd throw a picture of chickens to show that there's a lot of variety and options: chickens, goats, sheep, cows. There's a lot of options out there as far as combinations of animals. And so this is basically establishing a combination of trees or shrubs and compatible forages on the same acreage, providing forage, shade, and or shelter for livestock, including a purpose of enhancing wildlife. As you can see on every slide, I have the resource concerns: plant structure and composition, plant productivity and health, terrestrial habitat for wildlife and vertebrates, aquatic habitat for fish and other organisms. These resource concerns, I believe, will be teased out through CART and will help address the resource concerns identified by the software. Another new enhancement that we have is called biochar. Production from woody residue. There's been a lot of talk in the UW Extension, as well as a little bit with the council, the Governor's Council on Forestry, about particular focusing on the Southwest, and they have a lot of small diameter trees that there's no market for. There's no pulp market down here. So one of the options would be to use this enhancement, and basically you're getting a kiln or another method that gets the same product, and you're creating biochar, and then you're spreading that out on the ground. I've talked a lot with UW Stevens Point professors and our soil scientists here. There's a little not controversy, but the soil amendment part is not studied enough to say that it's good to put in any crop field to use this biochar to use for actual farming. They're working on research for that and finding out where it would apply and where it wouldn't apply. But for the sake in the forest, to reduce the amount of woody residue or the amount of biomass in the forest, this is an option for landowners. it hasn't been used yet, and because it's new, and so we're going to have to sort of figure out how to make sure that it works the way that we're trying to get it to work. But essentially, you're taking the material, burning it into this product that you see in the picture, and then you're spreading it out into the forest. The big resource concern is wildfire hazard from biomass accumulation and organic matter depletion. Many people may have heard of in the Amazon Terraform, which is a really highly productive soil that was created basically by doing this a long time ago. But that's sort of a reference people like to use for it. Another enhancement is increased stream shading for stream temperature reduction. We noticed with the weather getting a bit warmer and kind of staying in an increase, there's certain areas up in north, trout streams, things like that, where there's no vegetation along the streams, and that's warming the temperatures up and making it going to make it difficult at some point for fish to survive. So this is going to help keep the temperature shaded and cooler. And this one is basically it's definitely focused on the temperature reduction, but I think anybody that knows anything about riparian forest buffers, that these are also excellent for water quality and things like that. And there's going to be a new EQIP standard. It was in the new Farm Bill, had to be revised, so there's going to be a new standard coming out here in the next few months in EQIP that we'll be basing some of the decisions that we're making for this enhancement off of. Another one related to that is if you already have a riparian forest buffer, we can increase the width of the buffer to enhance wildlife habitat. So there might be a minimum of it when we first do a riparian forest buffer that you're 30 feet out. Well, with this enhancement, you could kind of add on to that and increase the amount of forest basically around near the stream and increasing the buffer width. And the resource concern for that is terrestrial habitat for wildlife and invertebrates. I think this next enhancement is kind of self-explanatory: stream crossing elimination. I think since I've been here, I probably say this anytime I talk about trails and landings and all trails and landings and stream crossings and things like that, is that really, I believe it's 80% of all the runoff, erosion, and problems that people have on their forest regarding to resource concern is from poorly built roads or having multiple crossings of a stream where only one is needed. So this one here is an enhancement to, for example, if a landowner doesn't need to get across the stream except for maybe every 20 years or 15 years, to eliminate that crossing is good. Or if they have multiple crossings, to take some of those crossings out. Again, that's focused on terrestrial habitat for wildlife and invertebrates. I think this next one is we're starting to get into the 612 tree and shrub establishment ones. I think the go-to for this program for planting is typically an EQIP tree and shrub establishment 612. But I think that if people are working with landowners or landowners that are basically converting their cropland to trees and forests, these enhancements are actually more economical for the landowner. In other words, they pay a bit more. So if you're going to be planting on a farm field or where it's previously cropped, this is a really good enhancement to look at because it pays a little bit better, which you can get better stock of trees and a bit larger size trees for it. And it is highly recommended, and usually with things in the 612 planting is a good time to get somebody into CSP to start this, because as you're going to see, there's other enhancements that build off of these. The resource concern for this is sediment transported to surface water. All these trees would have to be native species. There's only one standard that allows for non-native species, only species that are in the correct hardiness zone and can grow there, but we'll touch on that later. Another way to look at this tree and shrub establishment is is planting for high carbon sequestration rate. These ones are built really with the idea of climate adaptation in mind. The idea is to get trees that grow fast because they sequester carbon, but then you like to tie that into trees that grow that have a long lifespan. I've looked it up a number of different times, and the species that comes up, they always say getting a mix of species is the best way to do it. And there's not real specific species, but they do, I think every reference I ever looked at mentioned white oak and oak every time, because they start kind of growing fast, but then they have a long lifespan. The resource concern for that is emission of greenhouse gases. Another tree and shrub establishment enhancement is to restore species, to restore native plant communities. The resource concern being plant productivity and health, and plant structure and composition. I think this one is very exciting, because here is probably the one chance focus that pays rather well for a tree and shrub planting, is to be able to reestablish American chestnut or American elm, and we would be allowing some types of varieties for that, which we have in the past through tree and shrub establishment. But the focus, there's other species out there. These are the examples that were given. But as other things come up, we would take a look at it and see if we could approve or not approve it. But the idea is to restore native plant communities that were lost through past forest management practices, or eliminating certain species, or disease, like what we're talking about with the elm and chestnut. So this is another interesting planting one. And I think if people are looking at planting, EQIP is the one contract, one and go, but I think the CSP program actually has, I think it's more economical, but I think that it also has with the 5-year contract, you have a lot more time to work through in progress to meet the landowner's goals. Another tree and shrub establishment enhancement is the E612D. It's adding food producing trees and shrubs to existing plantings. So you had a planting 3 years ago, and you decide that you want to put some food-producing trees and shrubs because you're concerned about the plant structure and composition. Here the picture is a wild plum, but the idea is to get other trees and shrubs out there producing food for wildlife, and if it's native, if it's a native tree, which you have to be to use this enhancement for your own consumption. E612 is another planting enhancement, and it's called cultural plantings. This one it makes it sound like it's only focused on tribes, but it is more than that. I have a picture of birch trees there, which the tribes use for cultural reasons. I think I was in a meeting yesterday talking about how they use black ash for making baskets, and I think we all know about emerald ash borer coming through, and so there's a real concern about that and how to maintain these culturally significant trees and shrubs. But there are the state of Illinois uses cultural plantings. I believe for the cultural plantings for the state of Illinois, I do believe it has something to do with Christmas tree wreaths or something like that. So it doesn't have to be cultural plantings, and we don't have a list of, oh, here's the things that are considered cultural plantings. One, because the tribes don't like to give out the lists of the things that they use, because then like birch trees and stuff, there's people out there kind of stealing birch and stuff like that. So they try to keep that like little to themselves. So those DCs or our partners that work with, if you work with tribes and stuff like that, if you think there's a planting that it could be considered cultural and they want to get into CSP, we can talk about it. You can see there's a slippery elm, witch hazel, and other potential species. Another one that relates to Wisconsin is another planting is Sugarbush Management. Essentially, you're taking a maple a sugar maple stand, a sugar bush, and you're essentially, if it's a monoculture, you're basically trying to get 20% of the basal area into other species other than sugar maple, to provide basically to provide species diversity. Of that 20%, 10% of those trees need to be mass trees. They could be hard mass like acorns, or soft mass like maple. The idea obviously is to increase diversity within those stands, and manage your stand. So if there is an issue that comes around like emerald ash borer, maybe it'll lighten the blow. But this is just something to increase diversity out in the landscape. There are tree and shrub, 612G is tree and shrub planting for wildlife food. We sort of talked about that one with the previous enhancement about food producing trees. This is very similar. So again, I think if you're comparing programs, EQIP may seem like the easier route, but I think that CSP, of course, all this depends on site and client. CSP actually has a really good offering of things that people can specifically do in their forest to enhance their management system. Another enhancement, moving away from the tree and shrub plantings, is 654C, which is edge feathering for wildlife cover. There is an excellent description of this scenario for EQIP in the EFOTG guide under 654. But this is basically, essentially, if you noticed when you're out in a lot of places in Wisconsin, it goes from farm field to straight wall of border of trees, and there's really no transition zone. So this is where they're looking at basically creating a transition zone on the edge, lessening the amount of basal area there, getting some kind of shrubs and stuff into the site, and sort of have it instead of going from, you know, in a 3-foot span, going from farm field to, you know, darkness of the forest, you have like a transition zone right here. And this is a great one for wildlife, and I believe it's used semi-frequently since it became available, I think, last year. So we've had success with that, and we also now offer that in the CSP enhancements, like we see here. There is one enhancement. This enhancement, E66A, is maintaining and improving forest soil quality. Actually, I made a mistake there. There should be another 6 in that E666A. This enhancement is basically getting the landowner to adopt guidelines essentially from the best management practice of Wisconsin, which people should be following anyways. But we're essentially paying somebody to get into the plan ways that they can reduce the impact and improve the forest soil quality. So, for example, if they had roads, trails, and landings within the site, there are some best management practice techniques that would say, you know, to put water bars in every so often, things of that nature. And if then within that time frame of their CSP, they could be updating or creating a plan using this enhancement, but then they would basically, when they go and do any activity or harvest anything, they would essentially be following their plan with the idea focused on maintaining and improving forest soil quality. So this is a really good one. It's kind of an easy one, I think, for people to get to utilize, because a lot of it is just putting what they already most likely have in their plan and sort of getting a little bit more detailed. But this is definitely for like I was talking about earlier with the roads and erosion, these are some of the better things that we could do to minimize working in your forest, doing different things. Another 666 practice. So 666 is, I forgot what that means. Well, this one is for forest management to enhance understory vegetation. This one is basically a thinning type enhancement where you're going to go in and you'd be looking. One thing that comes to my mind is when they have a proliferation of ironwood growing. This would be a good practice to kind of eliminate some of those, and eliminate some lower quality trees to get some light in to start reestablishing to reestablish and enhance the understory vegetation. There's definitely cases in Wisconsin where this will work or would be useful. The resource concern, there's quite a few for this one. Plant pest pressure, terrestrial habitat for wildlife and invertebrates, naturally available moisture use, and nutrients transported to surface water, and lastly, nutrients transported to groundwater. So this is something to look at depending on the situation, and typically, like if they have a plan, which like I said, I kind of recommend, these things should be pretty much spelled out in the plan, any issues that would relate to this. Another practice for thinning is reducing forest stand density to create open stand structure. The focus for this one is plant productivity and health and terrestrial habitat for wildlife and vertebrates. It's also used in pine stands to sort of reduce the risk of wildfire. So the idea with this is that you have a stand of, for example, pine, and you basically you're doing a thinning to increase the size of the other trees, but you're reducing the quantity of trees within the site, so it's more open, and typically this is starting to get more light to the ground and starting to really initiate regeneration of the forest. So you're sort of, and then after that, after your regeneration after it reestablishes the regeneration, there'd be a number of years when the regeneration is good. That is when you would probably come through and do a overstory removal and remove all those trees that you left. That's one way to look at that, but as we know, there's a lot of ecosystems in Wisconsin, so some of you might have better ideas for where that might work or not. Another enhancement for forestry is to reduce forest density and manage understory along roads to limit wildfire risk and improve habitat. There are a few different enhancements, and I only brought this one up, that talks about reducing the vegetation along roadsides. You're basically, it's the word we always use in the Forest Service, and I see it's in this description, is you're basically daylighting the road. A lot of times they use it up north on the National Forest, basically so that the roads melt out earlier, so that they do that. Otherwise, you're basically just reducing the amount of volume. Say 50 feet from the road, you start reducing the amount of stems available for a fire, so that if a fire is coming through and it is in the crown, the density should basically force the fire onto the ground, and hopefully the road will work for you, but then you'd have another buffer on the other side that would hopefully stop the fire or keep it onto the ground. But there's a number of enhancements that are related to lowering the density along roadsides, basically daylighting the road. Another interesting enhancement that I find interesting is this 666H, which is increase on-site carbon storage. So essentially the landowner would be taking whatever acres or stands that they would like, and they're basically saying that we are not going to, for example, in Wisconsin, then this is something people have to think about, is that all the equipment in the mills are for small diameter wood. So you really do need to talk to your landowner and know your area as far as purchasing wood in mills, to know that you're not really setting somebody up to never be able to sell their trees. But the idea with this one is to basically, if at a normal rotation is say 30 years, you're basically going to extend that period of time past that. And it looks like, because the program is, the CSP contract is 5 years, you're essentially kind of waiting, you're going to take it 5 years for sure past that date. In these stands, we're looking for particular species that are long-lived. I mean, I think people know that oaks live quite a long time, but they are considered merchantable quite young relative to their age. And so basically we're just increasing the amount of, you're designating an area to set aside to not to cut. So in my mind, it's kind of an easy one for people to get involved with, because you're essentially just setting something aside. The resource concerns is emission of greenhouse gases and organic matter depletion. I think most people are familiar in this state with this enhancement or this practice. It's E66I, which is crop tree management for mast production. Essentially, this one is going in, and if you look at our standard in the EFOTG website that describes forest stand improvement, you're going to find that it has a really good picture diagram. You're basically opening up your mast tree species or your crop trees to allow more sunlight and to give them a boost of growth. So you're basically going around and looking at the four sides of the tree, four faces of the tree, and you're removing I think at a minimum 2 sides, but I think it's potentially 3 sides. The idea is you're giving that tree the advantage and taking away some of its competition so that it can grow faster and start producing mast and things like that quicker. But this one's really common forestry practice here in Wisconsin. Another enhancement that is related to cutting is facilitating oak forest regeneration. The resource concern is plant productivity and health, plant structure and composition, terrestrial habitat for wildlife and invertebrates. This one, I think, could be quite popular with the idea of promoting much more oaks. This enhancement will help. Excuse me. This enhancement, I can't make that move, will release seedling and sapling oaks from competing invasive plants and other undesirable species and thin stump sprouts. So in an oak stand, a lot of times they're going to go in, they're going to open it up to get a certain amount of light to start the regeneration. This enhancement would then, after you initiate regeneration, 3 years when you've got vegetation, say knee high or around that area, you can start going through, and we're basically paying you to go in and remove the species that is competing with the oak. Basically, you're going out there and promoting oak regeneration. So you're kind of removing all the other species undesirable species, and you're doing that rather quickly. And it's much easier to do at that stage of development than having to get a chainsaw, because you can do this with a hand clipper, really. The next enhancement, I think most people are relatively familiar with this type of practice, creating structural diversity with patch openings. This is a big for wildlife. The one thing that you need to really talk with your landowner about is how, if you have an aspen stand, by doing these patch openings, are you reducing the potential that they are going to have to be able to sell their wood as a product to any mill? And if that matters to the landowner or not. But the idea with this is to emulate patches that would result from natural disturbance regimes of wind or fire, varying geographically and by forest type and by tree species desired from natural regeneration. Essentially, the storm damage up north, the 2019 storm that passed through, and I think it hit around 400,000 acres, probably did more for the Young Forest Initiative than we have been trying to do even through our programs. So that is exactly what this is trying to mimic, is events like that, but we're trying to do it in a way that it's not a catastrophic event like that storm up there, where it's devastated a lot of people's livelihoods, really. So the idea is to be doing some of these patches to increase basically plant structure and composition. So you have different age structures in your forest. So you'll be walking through a forest that is, 10-inch aspen, but then there's all kinds of patches where they are 5 to 10 feet tall aspen, and kind of breaks up the continuity, and obviously different animals, like they're trees at different age classes and stuff like that. So that's something that, like I said, most people are pretty are pretty familiar with in NRCS and DNR and forestry world. Another enhancement is forest stand improvement to rehabilitate degraded hardwood stands. This particular enhancement, I've definitely seen a lot of places since I've been in the last 4 years in Wisconsin, where it comes to mind, particularly in the Southwest, where their land, basically a landowner got a logger to come in and essentially they high graded it, or they've been over the years just slowly high grading it. The idea with this is to rehabilitate that stand, and you're basically trying to reverse the process of degrading the stand and try to bring it back up to the way it's so it's doing its ecological function. And usually, most people will know right away when they see these types of things. So it's to identify where. It's pretty obvious. The sites I've seen where you walk out, it's a no-brainer that something isn't really right here. But this basically is a combination of silviculture methods. So some of these enhancements can be a little tricky, like this one, where you really got to read the national headquarters job sheet and supplement. This does a pretty general idea of explaining what has to happen, but it's a little bit more in depth in the national job sheet. Another one, enhancement. This one is used quite often in CSP already in the state. It's pretty self-explanatory. You're basically creating snags, den trees, and coarse woody debris for wildlife habitat. Obviously, the goal for that is the resource concern of terrestrial habitat for wildlife and invertebrates. Basically, you can see in these pictures, obviously, we won't be seeing the top left picture of redwood, but I think that is a great picture because that is a likely tree for bears in this area. And then another picture is a cedar from Door County that's obviously being used quite a bit, and another little bird. But this is one to just establish different kind of structure in your forest. A healthy forest has these things in them. So snags, den trees, and coarse woody debris is a good practice to look into for a landowner. The next enhancement is increased diversity in pine plantation monocultures. This kind of relates to the openings, but the sizes are a little bit different. So you got to look kind of at the fine details of these enhancements. But you're essentially taking a pine stand. Some of the NRCS employees will remember that if they went to the training in Marshfield, there was a pine stand there. And there were areas within that pine stand that were actually, the pines were not growing. They were not the best microsites for the pine. And this would be an excellent enhancement to go in, remove those smaller, less valuable trees, and to start establishing patches of other species within the stand. You can look at it in terms of going through and taking out, local, basically, personally from a forest or economics point of view, I'd be looking for the low quality spots to start increasing the enhancement, to start creating the openings. But a lot of that is determined really by the goals of the landowner, as far as where and if the economics is a major factor in their decision or not. But this is a very good enhancement. One of the things working in Colorado that I learned working in lodgepole pine, and you can see it in this picture, is that, I mean, really these pine plantations are essentially biological deserts underneath. I mean, it's just nothing but pine needles. We see a couple random hardwoods trying to get out in this picture, but you're basically going to be increasing the amount of diversity on the ground. And the last enhancement that I'd like to talk about for this little awareness training is a E66R. It's forest songbird habitat maintenance. This is pretty interesting. I've been reading a lot about it because I'm trying to figure out how to make it work here in Wisconsin based off the national guidelines. Essentially, what you're doing is you're doing some type of improvement, maybe a patch clear cut, maybe alder shearing, something like that. And the idea is with this enhancement is actually to work with somebody, a citizen scientist, or somebody that is basically has the qualifications to identify bird species. And 3 years after the treatment, they would go in, they would do a monitoring in the first year and then another monitoring later on to determine if there was an increase in the amount of bird activity. They saw that happen with the Young Forest Initiative in the north with the American Bird Conservancy. In fact, I believe this is a picture from them of a golden wing warbler to show an increase in birds. I've been trying to nail down a definite contact for our landowners and our field offices to use with either the DNR or another bird advocacy group out there, but it was really hard to get any kind of agreement when we didn't really know if one person signs up or 1,000 people sign up. So I left the Wisconsin supplement kind of open, and I would be able to be pretty flexible as long as we're meeting the national guidelines on how to make that work until something more solid can be determined. But at this point, I haven't really locked into anything that would be the go-to answer, the go-to group to be doing the monitoring. I think that the people that are interested in this are going to already have these kinds of connections, or they're already they're maybe not professional birders, and I think that we'll just kind of see how it develops based on the people that come and are interested in this, and kind of hope that we get. The reason why I like this particular one is that it kind of opens it up for NRCS to get a lot of different types of clients, because I think we all know that in Wisconsin that timber and products is really not the number one reason people own timberlands or forests. The Wisconsin Woodland Owners Association and the national organization for them every year posts a top 10, and timber's usually in the 7, 8, and 9 area, whereas there's a lot of other goals and reasons why people buy that. So I think this will help open it up. It's a little tricky of an enhancement, but we'll be able to figure it out. So along with, I just wanted to mention, because this is the only place, there's many other enhancements that are not in the forest that I didn't talk about. There's also some enhancements in the forest that we just didn't have time to cover, but they sort of related to ones that I did show. There's slight variations to those. But they also offer in the CSP program basically all the different practices that are available in EQIP. There's a little bit to know about the math and the dollars involved with using CSP for these practices versus using it in EQIP. But really, if you're looking at, like I said, if you have somebody that has a plan and they have like a definite list of things they need to accomplish, I think CSP, by looking at even some of these practices within CSP is actually a better value for the landowner, and it really achieves what we're trying to do here in NRCS to improve the quality of forests in Wisconsin. But two of those practices I want to mention, since we're talking so much about trying to get people aware and knowledgeable about agroforestry, is the alley cropping. And this is the only place that we offer this enhancement or practice is through CSP at this point, and that would be the same with silvopastoral. And even with silvopastoral, there's not a lot of enhancements to choose from. It's pretty slim pickings. But one thing I'd like to note for the future of alley cropping, as of now within the practice, this is going to be the only practice that someone would be able to, and this is basically going from taking it from a crop field and turning into something basically an alley crop with crops in the middle, with alley in the alley, and then trees on each side, like you see. This is going to be one of the only enhancements that you could actually take trees that are non-native to put in there. So you could have random fruit trees that are, as long as they're hardy to grow in Wisconsin and stuff like that. That's how the practice is set up at this point, but we haven't adopted it in EQIP, so we haven't taken a strong look at how we're going to approach that. But as of now, I look at this one as one of the few that would allow you to do something to get more non-native, non-native species, and thinking in terms of different type of farming practices. And both of these are really good for the climate adaptation as well. And I think that hopefully, through the help of Savannah Institute and other partners, we'll be able to get the word out and get this out on the ground in the places that will do the best benefit. So all the CSP enhancements and practices, including the practices, criteria, and payment methods, can be found at this website. So this is basically it's a few clicks away, but this is going to take you to a list of all the practices that are available in CSP and the payment rating and what the quantity is. It by tree or is it by acre or whatever. That's really just a list of the money, the payment kind of rates for it. And you'll have to work with your NRCS field staff, who are way more knowledgeable about how to utilize CSP for the benefit of the government and the landowner. And like I said, I checked, I think it was last week, to try to find the national job sheets that go into a bit more detail on these. They are available on the SharePoint internally with NRCS, but they have not been posted yet, and we'll be sending something out to our partners and everyone once that happens. So with that, like I said, it was kind of a brief awareness. A lot of the folks from NRCS have probably seen this list, taken a look at this list. And so I guess, does anybody have any pressing questions they'd like to ask?
Hey, Andy, this is Penny. You talked about CART a couple times, the Conservation Assessment Ranking Tool. So, and
Yes.
I believe there's trainings going on now, but has that only been for the NRCS staff? Because we have land conservation staff on this call as well.
Yes. So far they just did the first one this week in Wausau for CART, and they're doing another one, and this is all internal, next week here in Madison. And then I do believe that it will be they will start talking to other people, other partners and groups about CART. So CART is just I'm impressed you knew the acronym, because I can't pull it off. But it's gonna be a software tool that's going to help save field staff time by basically a program that ranks and then determines whether it's going to address the resource concern. I haven't had any training on it, so I can't really go much further than that. I probably went too far even than I should. But that I don't think it will really make too much of a difference on the land conservation folks. But and I think that they'd be working with their NRCS staff and the NRCS people would be putting it into the computer. So hopefully that helps. But information will be disseminated pretty quickly. But I don't know. I'm not privy to the time frames.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, but the reason I know is because the statewide interagency training committee is talking about it, and I've been working with Josh Odekirk mainly on that, and Mike Stanek a little bit. So that's why I know about it. I don't know. Are there any other people with questions out there? Otherwise, I think Andy did a great job of covering everything. So thanks for doing the presentation for us. So anything else you want to add, Andy?
Nope. Thanks, Penny, for making the technology happen. I appreciate it.
Yep. And thanks for putting it together, and greatly appreciate everyone joining us on a Friday. So have a good day and a super weekend. And I'm going to shut her down. Thank you.